Chapter 1. The Journey Begins. The Dream of Teaching. From the very beginning, João always knew that being a teacher was more than just a profession, it was a vocation. He had always held a deep respect for education and a burning desire to make a difference in the lives of others. The idea of teaching always made sense to him as a means of passing knowledge forward, cultivating new ideas, and perhaps helping to change the world, one student at a time. He still remembers the inspiring lessons he had in school and how those moments changed his view of the world. At 18, when he was about to enter college, he thought he was destined to be a teacher, someone whose words and ideas would help shape the future. The first steps in college. In college, João dedicated himself fully to acquiring all the knowledge possible about didactics, pedagogy, educational psychology, and innovative teaching techniques. He dreamed of a classroom full of curious students, their eyes attentive while he shared everything he knew. During the first months, he was enchanted by everything. Every class, every discussion, and every academic assignment made him feel like he was on the right path. The theory of education and practice began to merge in his mind, and he prepared with enthusiasm for the moment when he could finally put his ideas into practice. The hours of study were long, and the late nights were constant. João felt fulfilled learning new teaching approaches. He wanted to be an innovative educator, use technology, encourage critical thinking, and lead students to question the world around them. He spent hours preparing activities that he believed would make a great impact on the education of his future students. He was unbeatable, convinced that he could teach in a different way, and that the classroom would be his arena for transformation. The awakening of reality in the classroom. When he finally took on his first class, João was ready to transform teaching. But he soon realized that the road would be much harder than he had imagined. The first class was a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, and insecurity. He was nervous but determined to make his students see education the way he did. He prepared an engaging class, full of creative activities and new teaching methods, but quickly realized that enthusiasm alone wasn't enough. He faced a reality very different from what he had dreamed of in college. The classes were overcrowded. There were over 30 students in a single classroom. Some were disinterested, others were restless, and a small group seemed completely aloof to what was happening. What should have been an engaging environment soon became a battlefield. He realized that simply being enthusiastic and creative was not enough to engage all the students. Some were there because they needed to pass the year, others because school was their only available option. João tried with all his energy to attract the attention of everyone, but the results were not as expected. João's stress began to intensify. The work inside the classroom was only the tip of the iceberg. Outside the classroom, he faced endless meetings, bureaucratic decisions, and an educational system that seemed to leave no space for his creativity. He had to fill out a series of forms, make progress reports for each student, and keep in contact with parents, often without enough time to prepare for lessons adequately. The pace was becoming unsustainable. What started as a dream to transform lives and make a difference was quickly turning into a routine of constant pressure. João felt like a cog in a huge, rigid system. The pressure to achieve results was a constant in his meetings with the pedagogical coordinators. He was pressured to ensure his students were among the best in state and national assessments. Student assessments were becoming more important than real learning. He began to realize that the educational system was more concerned with numbers and results than with truly teaching. Pedagogical meetings, which should have been a space for sharing best practices and experiences, became encounters where he felt increasingly inadequate. He tried to apply new teaching methods, but the pressure to achieve good results in assessments prevented him from focusing on what really mattered: the genuine learning of his students. He felt trapped in a routine where teaching seemed like an obligation rather than a life mission. As the months passed, the feeling of exhaustion intensified. João tried to renew himself at the beginning of each semester. He planned new activities, attempted creative teaching methods, but what should have been a source of motivation became, in fact, a growing pressure. With each class he taught, He began to ask himself, am I really making a difference? Or am I just going along with a system that doesn't work? He found himself losing motivation, struggling against emotional exhaustion, not knowing how to regain the energy and passion he had when he started. The school environment began to feel more toxic for him. He saw other teachers who seemed to handle everything, the meetings, the classes, the demands, and they still seemed passionate about what they did. He, on the other hand, felt more and more overloaded, exhausted, and disillusioned. He began to question whether he was on the right path. The idealism that had motivated him to become a teacher seemed to be dissipating. He knew he had lost something essential, but didn't know how to regain the joy of teaching. Chapter 2. Overwhelmed and burnt out, Life Outside the Classroom, Expansion. As time passed, João's life outside the classroom became increasingly unsustainable. The schoolwork began to consume every aspect of his life, and he could no longer find a healthy balance. At first, João felt motivated to face the extra hours of preparation and the meetings. He saw this as part of his commitment to his profession, but soon he realized that he was sinking into an exhausting routine, where there was no time to relax or recharge. More and more, his personal life was becoming just an extension of his work. When João arrived home after a long day of work, he could barely focus on personal tasks. Piles of exams and notebooks to correct took over every corner of his house, and he felt unable to disconnect from school. He tried, in some way, to create space to rest, but the weight of the pending tasks always followed him. He could no longer enjoy a peaceful evening. Instead, he spent hours reviewing materials for the next day, checking emails, and correcting exams. His relationship with friends and family began to deteriorate. His friends noticed that he was becoming increasingly distant. He could no longer go out for coffee, go to the movies, or give attention to those he loved. His partner complained about his absence, and João felt immense guilt, but didn't know how to break the cycle. When he tried to talk to her about work, he found himself more tired and frustrated, unable to find words to express the mental exhaustion he was feeling. He began to question if deep down he had lost control over his personal life. João knew that the pressure was affecting his health, but he felt there was no choice but to continue. He felt the need to please everyone, the students, the parents, the coordinators, and most importantly, himself. But what started as a journey to make a difference in his students' lives became a frantic race for results. The joy of teaching was being replaced by the constant anxiety to ensure everything was perfect. Over time, his nights of sleep became shorter and more restless. Insomnia became a constant companion, and he began to feel increasingly frustrated. The complaints from students, the demands from the administration, and the pressure for results left him exhausted, and what was once a passion for teaching now seemed like an unbearable burden. Chapter 3. The Emotional Collapse, When Body and Mind Can't Take It Anymore, Expansion. João's internal tension began to manifest physically. He started experiencing constant back pain, a sense of extreme fatigue that never went away, and rising anxiety that caused him to lose focus on the simplest tasks. His mind was overloaded, and the physical and emotional stress began to take over his body. He no longer knew how to balance the pressure of academic results with the demands of his personal life. As the months passed, João found himself becoming more irritable and impatient with students. He began to notice that he was distancing himself from them, and the emotional connection he had with his students started to fade. The classes that were once full of energy now seemed like a chore. He found himself dragging himself to school, tired, unmotivated, and unsure of what to expect from another day of work. The impact of stress was affecting every aspect of João's life. His social relationships weakened, and he began to feel increasingly isolated. The pressure to meet all external expectations caused him to disconnect from everything that once brought him joy. He began questioning his ability to be a good teacher. He wondered, am I really making a difference in the lives of my students, or am I just trying to survive this system? The sleepless nights became more frequent, and anxiety took over his mind. With each hour spent at school, he felt himself drifting further away from his purpose as an educator. Work became the center of his life, but he no longer felt excited or energized. He was physically, mentally, and emotionally drained. He was exhausted from trying to be the perfect teacher for everyone, but he couldn't keep up with it all. The educational system was demanding too much from him, and he didn't know how to deal with the pressure. Chapter 4. The Recovery Journey. Finding the Way Back. Expansion. After months of emotional and physical exhaustion, Juwon finally decided that something had to change. He could not continue at this pace. His health was at risk, and his passion for teaching was fading. Therapy became an essential part of his recovery process. He began to understand the importance of separating work from his personal life and the need to find balance. Juwon learned that in order to be a good teacher, he needed to be healthy, both mentally and physically. It was not enough to dedicate himself entirely to work, ignoring his own needs. With the support of a therapist, Juwon learned to set clear boundaries between his profession and his personal life. He began to delegate tasks, ask for help, and accept that he could not do everything on his own. He also realized that the educational system, with all its flaws, was not something he could change alone. He needed collective support, and the internal pressure he felt began to lessen as he understood that he didn't need to be perfect all the time. In addition, Juwon reconnected with the joy of teaching in a more human way. He began to focus on the small victories and the deeper relationships he established with his students. He learned to understand that true learning was not limited to test results, but in creating a relationship of trust and mutual respect. Activities that once seemed like an obligation became moments of genuine exchange between him and the students. He also began to apply more flexible teaching methods, adapting to the needs of his students. Over time, Juwon rediscovered the joy of being a teacher. He began to dedicate himself to new ways of teaching, but with a better balance between his work and his personal life. He started setting aside time for rest, and his students noticed a difference in his attitude. Juwon knew that the recovery journey wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to do whatever it took to feel good again, both as an educator and as a human being. Conclusion. Juwon's story reflects the emotional and physical burnout many teachers experience. The pressure for results, the overload of tasks, and the lack of support often cause educators to lose themselves in the process, putting their mental health and passion for teaching at risk. However, Juwon learned to balance his professional and personal life, seek help, and reconnect with the joy of teaching despite the difficulties of the educational system.